Cameron. So I am Katie Van Werkhoven, and I'm joined here with my colleague, Michael Tiemann. The two of us have been working in the field of hydrologic forecasting since about the beginning of our careers, about over 40, aging myself, 20 years now. To start out, I'll give more of a high-level overview to start out, and Michael will then take over and get into some more technical details. So first, a little bit about our organization. RTI is a large nonprofit research institute headquartered in the Research Triangle Park area of North Carolina. We also have offices across the country. A large group of our water resources folks are in Colorado, and we have offices internationally. We have broad expertise across the institute, ranging from health and education to engineering and science. And water, our expertise really touches all of those groups. Our mission as a whole, the Institute's mission is embedded in our tagline here, is turning knowledge into practice. In other words, what we mean by that is we aim to span the gap between research and practical application in all the work that we do. And as a nonprofit, we are able to reinvest funds that we gain through projects and internal investments to do things like build tools and processes to fill gaps that we see a need for in industry, like some of the tools that we're talking about today. We are the Center for Water Resources at RTI, and we work across all levels of government, state and federal agencies, local agencies. We work with hydropower entities. We work with international organizations, banks. And in most cases, our objective is to do analysis or build tools to help with water-related decision-making. In hydrologic forecasting, the topic of today's presentation is a core area of expertise for us. We have several folks, not only Michael and I, but several others who have many decades of experience in the field of hydrologic forecasting. All right, so to start off, recognizing that we have a very broad audience here, I wanted to start off with a little bit of background in hydrologic forecasting, kind of what exactly we're talking about and how we're using different terms. Starting off, we're going from here forward, we're going to use the term flow forecasting really to represent any type of hydrologic forecasting. It could be stream flow, reservoir inflows, stage, water level, reservoir volumes, any hydrologic variable of interest. But just for simplicity, we're going to wrap that all up in the term flow forecasting going forward. Okay, so the big picture process of forecasting that we're talking about is translating real-time observations and forecasts of precipitation, translating those into forecasts of hydrology, again, any variable of interest, in order to provide guidance for decisions. And those decisions may be related to reservoir operations, public warnings, water supply decisions. This is the whole point of doing forecasting, is helping to guide decisions and give decision makers more confidence and have better information to make their decisions. And again, the decisions may relate to high flows for emergency management type decisions, where high flows are the concern, reservoir operations during high flows. It could be all flow conditions or low flow conditions for water supply, navigation, or hydropower. Again, the goal being to provide information to help make these decisions that are dependent on future hydrologic conditions. So very quickly, we want to take a poll to get a sense of our audience and kind of what type, the first question is, what type of water-related decisions do you make? So we'll give everyone a minute here to just simply answer this question. And what sector are you in? What type of decisions do you make, or does your organization make? And we'll see kind of what we end up with here for the distribution of our audience. Give it another minute. We have a good distribution of folks. This is interesting. A lot of perspectives. That's great. It looks like we have just a little bit of everything, a little bit more water supply interest on the line, but some reservoir operations, emergency management, hydropower, water quality, and then we couldn't encompass everything here, so several that are under other. Okay, that's great. And just close that, I think. Okay. Okay, so a little bit more background on the basic process. The process of forecasting is essentially collect real-time and observed time series of precipitation, pass those into, use those as inputs to some sort of function or model. It could be a physical or conceptual model. It could be a AI type process, a statistical model, and a function that the goal of this is to capture factors that affect the magnitude and response, magnitude and timing of the hydrologic response, things like watershed area, slope, land characteristics, as well as antecedent soil moisture conditions or snowpack, anything that might affect the hydrologic response, and then simulate that hydrologic response both in the recent past and future period. And then, of course, to use that information to make decisions. This is the basic process we're talking about. This is very simplified. There's a lot of versions of this. Michael's going to get into more details on this as well. But just so everyone's on the same page in terms of what we're talking about. We're talking about real-time forecasting for water decision making. So sources of hydrologic forecasts, flow forecasts are growing, both in terms of the locations and frequency that publicly available forecasts are available from RFCs. This top chart here, those dots are forecasts available from river forecast centers, as well as now the National Water Model from NOAA. In addition to publicly available, there's also more and more options out there for systems that can be set up in-house to do your own custom forecasting. There are options to receive forecasts through web-based services, through or the cloud. And with the advent of machine learning, there's more and more possible sources and options that are out there. So this makes it difficult to know if you're already using forecasts, or if you're considering using forecasts, which source should you consider, or if you're already using forecasts, if there are improvements that could be made or other sources that you might want to consider. So a quick second poll, if you use forecasts, and no is one of the options on here that you don't, but if you do use forecasts, what source do you use? Do you use publicly available? Do you generate those forecasts in-house? Do you use only weather forecasts? Do you have somebody with a lot of experience on your staff that makes estimates of runoff or stream flow or inflows? Do you receive flow forecasts as a service? Again, we've got a good distribution here. Cool, we've got a little bit of everything. Yeah, we have several who don't use forecasts, which I expected, and then a good distribution across different types of sources. Some using weather forecasts only, some using experience, publicly available forecasts, custom forecasts as a service, and then a bunch that generate forecasts themselves. That's great. Oh. Someone yell if I'm not sharing these correctly. Everyone can't see these results. We'll show them, yeah. Maybe we can show them later as well. All right, so one point I want to make with given those results that we've got quite a distribution of sources that people are using. All of what we're talking about today is source agnostic. Essentially, the methods we're describing are related to evaluating forecasts, any forecast from any source. So a question that comes up, and I'm sure those of you that are using forecasts have had this question yourselves: how useful are the forecasts? Not only in terms of monetary value, but are they serving the purpose? Are they serving the purpose, providing the information that you need to make your decisions? The process of trying to get to the bottom of this question is forecast evaluation. And this is what we're talking about today. What is forecast evaluation, and how do you go about doing it to help answer some questions like this? There's two aspects to forecast evaluation, two kind of stages that you might perform some evaluation, might want to do some evaluation. The first stage is kind of what we're thinking about is the overall fitness of the system. Is your system in good shape? Has it been well built? Is it working properly? Is it well calibrated? How does it perform over many, many past events, and what are trends in performance? And this gives you, assessing the overall shape or performance of your system gives you overall confidence in your system. However, you can still have good and bad performance, even with a good system in good shape. You can have events where it performs well and events where it performs poorly. So another piece of evaluation is, how does it perform on race day during an event? And this is looking in more detail at a specific event, looking for indicators that might influence your level of confidence in a specific forecast. All right. Okay, so overall, in these two kind of groups of types of evaluation, some questions that the process can help you to answer. And this is what we want to get across, is these are questions that, that there are tools to help to answer, such as, would publicly available forecasts meet our needs? Is it worth the time or resource investment to acquire or generate forecasts? Are the forecasts we're using providing useful information for our decisions? What aspects of our system should we focus on improving? And then on race day, how much confidence should we have in this current forecast? Are the conditions similar to past events that were well forecasted or poorly forecasted? Are there any clear shifts we should make in our decisions based on that level of confidence in the current forecast? These are questions that there are tools to help you answer. So how do we go about assessing the value of flow forecasts for a given purpose? This quote really gets at, I think, one of the key points of forecast evaluation. It's a quote by Dr. Alan Murphy, who's one of the leaders, or was one of the leaders in weather forecast evaluation. And it states, forecasts possess no intrinsic value. They acquire value through their ability to influence the decisions made by the users of forecasts. It was written in terms of weather forecasting, but it holds equally true for hydrologic forecasting. And it gets at the point that value and quality are not the same thing. We often use those two interchangeably. Value is generated when a decision is made by a user, like an emergency manager, water supply utility manager, or reservoir operator. And it reminds me of the adage, if a tree falls in a forest and no one is there to hear it, did it make a sound? So kind of similarly, if a river flows in a forest and is perfectly forecasted, was that forecast of any value? Maybe if there was a rafting company or deciding whether to send trips out, or a reservoir just downstream. But if no decision was made based on that forecast, even if it was a perfect forecast, it may be of limited value. And a common example in the meteorology world is a high quality forecast of a sunny day in the Sahara Desert. High quality, limited value. So decision context is key to assessing value. What information is needed for the decisions, and evaluate based on that information. How far in advance do you need to know? How far in advance do you need to make your decisions? Do you care about high flows or low flows? Do you care about the final peak magnitude, or just simply whether a threshold is crossed above or below? that threshold. And a forecast may, the quality of the forecast may be different depending on which decision context you care about for a single type of forecast or even a single event. And the baseline is also key. And it's rarely nothing, and also rarely just simply climatology or persistence. It may be that you look at precipitation forecasts and make your own estimates based on that. You may be already using some models that you've set up for other purposes. You may have staff with a long-term experience that just kind of know, just from experience, how much inflow there may be, or how much, how high the water level might be at that intersection when you've got a certain amount of rain in the forecast. But what happens when that person retires or wins the lottery and moves to Tahiti? Where's that information going to come from? And then there's even rules of thumb, and we've heard one response where when we asked, where do you get your forecast information, the response was they put their finger to the wind and estimate it that way. So there's all sorts of baseline conditions of where people might get their information before using model-based forecasts of flow. And quality, of course, is the foundation of flow. And this is an area where we're going to focus most of the rest of the presentation, tools to assess the quality, but within the context of the decision and baseline. How well did the forecast provide the information you need? How well did they align with what actually happened after the fact? So putting it all together, the steps of forecast evaluation are first defining the decision context. What information matters? Defining the baseline, what are we comparing against to judge the value of a given source of forecasts? And then assess the forecast quality with respect to both the decision and the baseline context. So third poll question is just simply, do you evaluate the quality of your forecasts if you are a user of forecasts? And again, it's not only for forecasts that you generate yourselves, but also publicly available forecasts. Whatever source of forecasts you use, do you evaluate the quality for only certain events or for all events? I'll give you a minute to finish answering that. Right, we've got, again, a mix. We've got a lot of folks who are, so that's great to hear. Okay, so 11 that are, a few that are for certain events, which is the most common, the common situation, and then some for all events. Okay. Great to hear. Okay, so those of you who are evaluating forecasts, I'm sure you're familiar with the fact that there are two general sources or two general approaches to forecast evaluation. One being qualitative, we consider it like eyeball methods, and another quantitative, where actually calculating statistics or other approaches, numerical evaluation methods. And again, within these two kind of aspects, the overall fitness and on race day, both qualitative and quantitative approaches may be used for both overall fitness and specific event evaluation. Okay, so I'm going to talk briefly about some tools for qualitative information, and then Michael's going to pick it up from there to talk about quantitative evaluation. So qualitative, again, it's kind of the eyeball method. If you just look at a hydrograph or a map, what is it telling you? How close did the forecast capture? How well did the forecast capture the information? What actually happened? So this is like events on starting. This is like looking at an event a specific event, you may know that the system is in good shape or well conditioned at the starting point, but how did you finish? After the event happens, how well did you actually capture how well did the forecast actually capture what ended up happening? So this is a tool that RTI built for post-event forecast evaluation. It's qualitative, it's for a single event. And the pieces of this are at the top, there's observed precipitation, and then right below it is a single forecast, precipitation forecast. Down below, we have a single flow forecast, and we have the observed flow. On the right, we have the simulated flow, the red line, against the simulated flow, the red line, which is simulated using observed precipitation. So this is like the model flow, ignoring precipitation forecast uncertainty. And then the observed flow is the dashed line. And then below that, we have all the traces, all the forecasts that were generated for that specific event. So what this allows you to do is just simply, all forecasts and the observed flow there as well. So there's a lot of pieces to this, but it's a lot of information really nicely linked to see step by step through a forecast. Oh, and there's the region where the single forecast is bold here, that lines up with the forecast that is shown over here. All right. So you can step through time step or reference time or issue time by issue time and see how the precipitation forecast evolved, how the flow forecast evolved, and where it fit within the whole set of forecasts that were issued over the course of that event. Okay, so that is a tool that we use for post-event evaluation, qualitative approach to assess how forecasts, the information that was available to decision makers at each point in time throughout the course of an event. So now I'm going to pass back over to Michael Tiemann, and he's going to take over from here.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. Yeah, so Katie talked about qualitative evaluation. I'm going to go a little bit more to the quantitative side of things. It's going to be more about lots of data, fewer pictures, more statistics. So bear with me. So just to recapture, I have to make sure I can move forward here. So just as Katie said, during the evaluation of forecasts, we are going through different phases. And it's really about getting the data and getting the context. So talk about getting the data. What we really want to do first is generating or acquiring samples of representative forecasts. So representative forecast is a forecast that you believe is going to be really typical for what you will do during operations. And at a second step, then we really have to define, and that's where the context is coming in, what are the flows that are important to us? I mean, are we really interested in all the flows all the time or not? And I'll talk about this here in a second. And then the third point is, we have to, in the last phase, compute the actual statistics based on these representative forecasts and the way that we defined that we want to look at this. And again, and the key here is to really look at things where it is important to us. So one thing that we have heard a lot in the past is that, why don't we just look at our model simulation data? What we call historical simulation. When we set up a forecast system, at some point we created the models to do that. And so we have that. We have very likely a simulation run where we ran the model maybe over 10 years for a particular location, and we played around with it until it got us really good performance. So why can't we just do that? Well, those historical simulations, they use observed meteorology. And with that, those data are not the same that are being used in operational forecasting. They're really different. They really represent like a ground truth versus a forecast, being it a flow forecast or a meteorological forecast that is typically the input to a flow forecast. Those are forecast data, so they have their additional part of uncertainty. So if you look at the historical simulation, we are assessing primarily the uncertainties in the model. There's, of course, uncertainty in the observed data as well, but for the largest part, we assess the uncertainty in the model, assuming that our observed rainfall data, for example, in the past is reasonably accurate. So moving forward, if you look at forecast run, they typically use forecasted meteorology. So when we want to assess how a forecast has done, we need a run that is based on historical forecasted meteorology. Again, trying to reproduce what happens during operations. And with that, we can really assess the uncertainty not only in the model, but also in the operational forcing. And in our experience, that can be quite a big part of the uncertainty in the overall forecast. So that said, historical simulations do hence miss out on really important uncertainties. So for now, moving on, I'm just going to talk about forecasted data, not historical simulation, only forecasts that were produced using historical forecasted meteorology. So how do we generate then these forecasts for the evaluation process? And there are like basically two ways we can do that. We talked about the training part, getting ready for the race, and then the race day part. If we have an operational forecast system, we can do both. We can build the system. We can archive any created forecasts, and if we do so for a long time, we can basically address a large sample size of forecast and do the training evaluation, so to speak. Of course, while we're doing it, we can also any day look at the current situation and do the race day evaluation. Well, that is, of course, complex, costly, and it's slow. We have to first build the forecast system. You have to operate it, which is expensive in terms of time that the staff needs to do that. And, again, as I said, you might need a year or 2 or 3 or 4 to build a set of forecasts that you can evaluate statistically. The other method that we can do is called hindcasting. For hindcasting, you basically look back. You don't look forward, but you create a batch of past forecasts all in one setting. And this can be used, for the training evaluation, looking how, in general, you have done over the past. So, to do that, we have to collect and process archived meteorology, both observed and forecasted. We have to set up our models and then, as I said, create these forecasts in the past. So this process is then certainly much simpler than building and operating a forecast system. It's cheaper because most of the work is actually done by computers, and you don't need operators to look at things every day. And it's quick, quick, kind of relative. It's rather than weeks and a few months rather than years to create large data sets of forecasts. So I will talk about these hindcasts some more here from now on. And to prepare those, as I said, we need meteorological data. And you might recall there were 2 pieces. There was the observed meteorology. I think we're all pretty familiar with that. Those data are reasonably easy to get. And, given that at any point in time, you only have one observed value, it's not very large data sets. Examples are, like MRMS data, the global precipitation mission data, observations, that we get from the many weather stations around the world, and particularly in the US and Canada, we can get to those data reasonably easy. There are other data sets out there. So for practical purposes, getting observed meteorology is not a big issue. Well, talking about forecasted meteorology, then it's a different story. I mean, those data sets are typically very, very large. You have to imagine, at any point in time, you have not just one value, but you have an entire set of value going into the future from that point in time. And in particular, if you have gridded data sets for forecasted meteorology, which most meteorological forecasts come that way, you can amass very, very large data sets. It can be, in the many gigabytes to terabytes of data. So in general, large data sets. Well, the additional problem here is also that those data are hard to get because they are so large. Those data sets have not necessarily always been archived. And often the archives are spotty. They are across different sites. Some you have to pay for, some are free, come in different data formats, different organizational structures. So these data are hard to get there. So while it's possible to get something like in the US, the HRR data set, or maybe more well-known, the CFS and GFS forecast, or even the ECMWF weather forecast data, it's not necessarily a straightforward process, and it certainly requires a large disk sizes to store all that stuff. But this can all be solved. So once we have that, the next thing is sorry, I went too fast here. You have to prepare hydrologic models to make sure that you use the models that you use in forecasting also during your evaluation. So now we can run the Hindcast, and that's not necessarily very complicated. It's all computer processing, but then it's all a pretty similar processes. For any day in the past, and we're starting here on a hypothetical date of January 1st, 2014. We assemble all the meteorological forecasts, and we run our models with that data, and then it generates for us a forecast at that particular time. And as I said, the forecast, the data then go out into the future from that particular date. I know we do the same thing automatically. It goes on, it runs the model again, and creates another forecast. One important thing to mention here, and I hope you can see that, as we do this, we have to kind of reproduce what we would do in operations. In operations, you typically run your forecast using observed meteorology up to now, or up to like the last time that you can actually get observed data. And only in the future do you use the meteorological forecast. So we have to reproduce that process in hindcasting. So not only do we have to run the model through the archived meteorological forcings, but also through the observed meteorology. And again, this can be done automatically, lots of processing, and eventually, end up with an archive of forecasts. And then we are ready to basically look at those data. So this is a hindcast process. So my question for you right now is, have you done this before? So please answer the question. It's a very easy question here. Only yes or no. And I see, actually, I'm a little bit surprised. Actually, a lot of you have done it. So right now, we're actually looking at about 40% of the listeners here have actually done hindcast before. Okay, I'll give you another few seconds here. Okay, so yeah, I'll share the results. You should see them now. It's about 40-60. Actually, it's exactly 40-60. So majority of you, a small majority, has not done hindcast before. Very good. So let's move on, and let's just talk a little bit about the next step. So now let's just assume we now have all the data. So now we really have to talk about the one thing that Katie really was mentioning again and again. That is what is important. And if you look here at a set of historical data, some of us might want to look at flow ranges. They might be interested in high flow and low flow ranges. I'm sorry, I'm experiencing quite a lag right now.
You're clicking and it's not working, Michael?
Yeah. Okay, maybe now it's better. So high flows or low flows, and that might be important for certain users. Other users might really be more interested of the flow in certain times of the year. Like in this example, it's going to be the flow just during the summer months. And there couldn't be any combination of this, of course. Other users might really be compelled to evaluate about specific events, like here, the famous flood of 2017 with this particular gauge, or maybe the less famous and very short drought of 2019. Again, specific events might be of importance. And then, lastly, what is typically of interest is, how well can we actually forecast flows way in the future? So based on a forecast I do today, how much information does that forecast give me, let's say 3 months out into the future, and then for the 6 months following that 3 months out into the future. And so these are 4 different pieces how we can really slice and dice the data that we will be looking at based on observed data. And why are we doing that? Really, this is all, again, to build the context, so to really define, so what is truly important to us. And one important note here is it's not just flow that we need to look at. We can also look at stages or volumes. For example, during emergency management, the stage at very high flows often rises slower than at lower flows because the water spreads out into the floodplain. So, if stage is important to us, we should look at stage rather than flows. Or for water supply, if volumes are important to us, we should look at volumes rather than flows. But in any case, so once we have defined what we want to look at, we have everything we need. We typically have a large archive of flow forecasts. Could be hundreds, could be thousands. Often it's really several thousands. We have for each location, of course, one set of observed flows. And, as we just did, we defined the context. How are we actually going to look at those forecasts in how they are reproducing the observed flows? So what we can do here now is then, look at all these gigantic set of data. And in this example here, the black dots are some observed flows, and the lines here are different forecasts issued at different times. You might notice, they start at different times. So it's actually 5 days apart, and each of these forecasts goes out 10 days. So one way of looking at it, and it's just one way, and there are many other ways, is just to see how well is my forecast performing based on lead time. So on any forecast, how well does it forecast the flow 10 days from the beginning of the forecast in the future? So just looking at one value, the 10-day forecast. So in this case, it would be these values as indicated here, and the arrows, they show us how different the forecast 10 days into the future after it was generated represents what was observed. And as you can see quite clearly, sometimes we're doing better down here, and sometimes we are not doing well at all because we obviously forecasted an event that didn't happen or happened later. And by extending this process, we can then of course look not just at one value but multiple values. We can say, hey, how well is my forecast doing on day 10 to 13 out into the future? So now we will get a set of values. And using such an approach, and we can of course also then slice and dice by flow ranges and times of the year and so forth. We can basically create a large sample of data points, of forecast points versus observations at the same time. And then we can, as we all know, generate statistics. And I'm not going to go into those statistics too much. Key thing is there are a lot. Which ones you use really depends on your context. Water supply, maybe you're more interested in statistics that are representative of flow volume errors. If you are in emergency management, you might really be interested in basically false alarm rates or the level of detection of events. Others might just have a combination of those. If you are looking at ensemble forecast, you might even want to look at skill scores, something that gets a little bit more complicated. Now we are ready. So we have now all our data, we have all the data points, and now we could actually compute the statistics. Of course, we can do that in a spreadsheet. All of us know how to operate a spreadsheet. We could sit down and spend weeks and months to do that, to put all the data in and set it all up. That takes certainly a lot of time, and it's very error prone. Particularly if I were to do it, I would likely put a lot of mistakes in there. So that's why a second way of looking at those statistics is to use what we call an evaluation system. And that system is really just a system that stores all the information in an easily accessible format, allows us to define what we want to look at, think of these flow ranges and times of the year, and then it does the statistics. And the system looks more or less like this. So again, we have a big database where all the information that we have is in there. And when I say big, this can be a humongous database. This can go into the many hundreds of gigabytes or even terabytes of data, particularly if you look at forecasts at different locations, or maybe even different types of forecasts for the same location. So we have what we call a staging database. Everything is in there. The key thing now to really efficiently do any processing of these data is to link things up. As I said, you want to link the observed forecast data points to the forecasted data points, and then slice and dice this all based on the configuration that we set up, our flow ranges and so forth. So now these things are mapped now. They're easily accessible by any statistical calculation algorithm, and then we can do that. And just one word of caution, if we do this, we generally create thousands, tens of thousands of statistical values based on all the different forecasts, based on all the times of the year, based on the flow ranges, based on different statistics that we compute. So we end up with really humongous data sets, and which is nice. But what does it do to you if you actually can't look at it? So we typically put this into what we call a data cube, which is basically a gigantic multi-dimensional cube of information through which we then can slice and dice and look at it in all different manners to really try to make sense of that. And in order to do that, we use a lot of different ways. One can look at these data cubes just with Excel. Use the pivot function in Excel, or you can use a Power Pivot if you want to go a little bit further. We can use something like Microsoft Power BI, which is a pretty common tool these days. Or for those who are inclined to do a little bit of coding, they can use Tableau, Bouquet, Python, or even custom websites to look at this data. So, and what does that allow us now? This allows us to really, as I said, to slice and dice. And here we see on the right side of the screen, we see a number of, just a screenshot I quickly pulled off. One here, the one on the bottom, we're looking at forecasts at 3 locations as a function of lead time. In this particular case, those are all the forecasts that were created for a particular time. But we could look at lead time, just during the freshet period, or the lead time only for observed flows that were larger than a certain number. In this particular case, we see something that is not overly surprising. There's a correlation. Decreases with time. So we're doing, of course, better in the very near future. We know the forecast might be impacted, by routed flows upstream that we already observed, or even precipitation that has already fallen. But things go down as we look further out into the future. Some location it goes down quicker. Other locations, the values stay higher. We can look at things like that. Or here in this particular plot, we're looking at the forecasted variance of flows versus the observed variance of flows for a number of locations, but for entire forecasts in particular years. So we can see, hey, certain years we did pretty well. In other years, no, we did not do very well because we just weren't able to explain the variance in the observations very well. Again, 2 examples of hundreds of different ways we can look at it. Again, so now we kind of whittle things down a little bit, at least from tens of thousands of statistical values to maybe a few hundred ways of looking at things. But the key thing is we just have to now look at things correctly, and really there's no right or wrong way. It really depends on the situation how we look at all these statistics now. And what we have to answer ourselves before we do that is why we want to do that. The one thing is we want to gain confidence. Are we overall doing okay during certain times for certain flows, with a certain lead time, and for certain events. And if we build the confidence, great. If we don't build the confidence and our forecasts are actually not as good as we hoped they would be, then certainly looking at these statistics and really driving into the details can pinpoint areas, where the process can be improved. Maybe we are forecasting low flows very well all the time. Maybe we're doing the freshet all the time, but maybe in the summer, if some convective events happen, we are having problems. So we can pinpoint that using statistics. And one other way we can look at the things, and for this we don't necessarily need the statistics, we can also look at the raw Hindcast data. We can calculate future benefits or return on investment. We could, for example, use archive forecasts to create a forecasted generation for hydropower generators. And they could then say, hey, had we used forecast in the decision-making for our reservoir and generation operations, could we have produced more power? And maybe could we have produced power at times when it was actually very, very good for sale because the electricity prices were high. So again, so we can do a multitude of things after we have done all these hindcasting and statistic calculations. So the key thing here is, however, that the context is still important. Again, we always have to remind ourselves, what is it what we truly want to forecast? And it's also important to look not only at the race day statistics and performance, which is using just a few forecasts, but also at the overall system performance, our training time period, so to speak. So in summary, I think we were able to make a point in that forecast evaluation is a key part of making the best use of existing forecasts that we might be using already, our own forecast, other people's forecasts. But it's also a key part of deciding whether it's actually a wise investment to either create your own forecast system or to improve your own forecast system, or to go out and buy a forecast created by somebody else. Again, there's no cookie cutter approach to this. It requires a lot of data, specific tools. We showed you, two tools in particular. One was our hindcasting and evaluation system, and before that, Katie showed you our real-time qualitative performance tool. So with that, we are at the end of our presentation. I think now it would be nice to hear from you. Any questions?
Okay, there is one question in the chat, and I think this one's probably for you, Michael. The question is there a way to incorporate any model tuning, adjusting of state variables that you would do in real time that the forecaster would do in an operational setting into the hindcasts in an automated way? Good question.
That's a really good question. I have to admit, we have discussed this on and off. Is there a way? Sure. Is it an easy way? Not necessarily. Yes, if you do forecasting and in an operational sense you're off by a little bit, you typically go in and adjust what's called model states. So yes, your hydrological model might just assume that there's less water in the soil than there really is, and hence it will give you forecasts that are low. So yes, it behooves us to go in and adjust for this and add more water to the system. So how can you do that during hindcasting? Yes, that would basically require an additional step in a hindcasting process where we, at any point in time, actually look back over, let's say, a week period and automatically decide whether we are low in our water balance or not, and then adjust the model states. For certain models, that is certainly doable. For example, the National Weather Service uses the Sacramento model. The models that are typically employed there and the way it is employed allows this adjustment of model states in a pretty automated way. Would it be exactly what you would do in operations? Pretty likely not, but it certainly would come close. Another example would be snow water equivalent. You could put more snow into your model if you detect that you have not enough. So
the challenge, right, is kind of representing the human decision we might make, where there's processes to do data assimilation that adjust states in an automated way, but never quite exactly what a human forecaster might do.
Right. So yeah, I have to admit, the best we can do is kind of make any hindcast that we create representative of a true operational forecast. We should be able to get pretty close. For certain models, we can get really, really close. With others, we still have some uncertainty left over.
That was a really good question.
Yeah.
Any other questions? That's the only one in the chat. And if anyone has a question they'd like to just tell us, I believe you can raise your hand with the
There's a question that came in through the chat. Is flow forecasting more useful for planning for flooding or for droughts?
Katie?
Is it overall more useful? That's what there's not a single answer to that, I think. It depends on, there's certainly the confidence in precipitation forecasts is higher in short-term precipitation forecasts. The uncertainty grows as you go further out in time. Does that make it less useful? It depends on the decision and how the decision is impacted by uncertainty. The forecast can be generated for any stretch of time where you have hydrologic forecasts can be generated for any duration of time where you have a meteorological input, right? That's forcing it. So it becomes dependent in terms of quality and uncertainty. It becomes dependent on the uncertainty in the precipitation forecast, which is lower in short term, higher in long term. But that, as we presented, that's not the only component of utility. We'd have to answer that question for a specific decision. We'd need to look at, what decision are you making, and what's the baseline, and what's the tolerance for uncertainty.
Right. Yeah.
Forecasts are used for both.
For both, exactly. We're just answering different questions. For flood forecast, you want to basically answer how quickly am I going to come to the highest flow, and how high will that flow or water level be. For a drought, you might be looking much more into, hey, when will the drought actually end? I mean, that's typically the key question, and how much water do I not have at the end of the drought that I otherwise would have.
Right, or just, even if not in drought conditions, for making planning decisions related to water supply. It may not, which sources to pull from. There's an example for water supply. Michael, you know more about this, but the New York City uses forecasts operationally very extensively to help decide which source of water to pull from based on water quality. So that's not necessarily long-term. That's also a short-term decision based on quality related to sediment and other factors.
Okay, yeah, I think I see a few more questions in the chat.
Am I missing that?
Yeah, let's see.
Oh,
here it says,
in the wrong place. Okay.
How do you answer a town's question? How much water can I take out of the river? The main thing here is it a short-term or a long-term decision-making process? Are you interested in taking water out of the river right now? Basically, we are out here in the West. In the West, do you have the right to do that, or how long can you expect to have the right to do that, to take water out of your river? Or it might be a question, is the water level in the river going to fall below my intake structure? But in general, you can, particularly if you look at a shorter term, you can answer the question, is the water level going to fall below my intake structure? If you look longer term, you can certainly see that in general, the volumes that I need and I have the right to take might actually be in the river when I need them.
Right, the forecasts give you a quantitative, a way to quantitatively see what the impact of that intake will be on the flows. If you have a low flow permit or some threshold that you need to stay above, right? Modeling that and modeling in the future, what sort of, what impacts based on both the flows that are projected to come, the forecast of precipitation and how that translates to stream flow. And then if you withdraw a certain amount, what's the resulting impact, and are you dropping below that threshold? So those are the kind of questions, and like as Michael described, what you can answer. So we have a few more popping up here.
Yeah, two more questions. One is from the Bureau of Reclamation. The question is that emerging monitoring technologies have potential to add value to forecast by virtue of better basin condition characterizations. However, those new monitoring programs that we might be thinking, I think we are thinking about soil moisture monitoring from space, for example, or groundwater monitoring using gravitational detection. Those are all pretty new. Our thoughts of how that can be overcome. Certain aspects I think we can overcome. Soil moisture, for example, I think there are ways to project those soil moisture states back in time. Are you going to get really good statistics out of it if you only have like 5 years of data and use soil moisture data and use that to maybe simulate that, as into the hindcasting process? I kind of doubt it. Again, it all depends how representative do you want to be in your hindcasting process, versus the actual operational forecasting. So my thought is, yes, we can substitute those data, but it's not going to be a really good substitution. Katie?
No, I was just going to add, that impacts the hindcasting, but more information is always helpful. Right? So as more information becomes available, And an example I'm thinking of is in North Carolina, we have a lot of gauges, through the state and through other agencies that are coming online, so that provides information about actual stream flow conditions and levels, and infusing that, using that to inform the forecasts is a positive thing, even if there is a short period of record. So it may be difficult to integrate that into hindcasting and longer term assessment of the shape of our system. But in current forecasting going forward, we can, once it becomes available, start to assess how it's, with and without, how for a single event or a set of events where we have the information, how has it improved the accuracy for that small set of events. You have to be careful about making any larger inferences from the small set of events, but we can still compare for a smaller set kind of what the impact and benefit of that information has provided.
Right. I think we're looking more at the race day rather than
right, exactly.
the practice period.
Right, but we want the goal is to get as accurate as generate forecasts that are as accurate as possible. Ultimately.
Okay. Yeah, we have another question. Are those tools integrated into a system? It's called DelftFuse. DelftFuse is a forecast system that has been, implemented all over the world. It's very, very common. Yes, DelftFuse can be used to do hindcasting. We're running hindcasts with one of our partners here already for one client right now. It takes about 3 weeks for 5 forecast points and 4 years to run all the required hindcast data sets there. And the second question here was, can this analysis then also be done? Yes, it is. There are data. There are solutions to do this performance evaluation using hindcast data set. One is called the EVS, the ensemble verification system. It's kind of like a more manual process to do it through that system. And the other one is the one that's showing here on the screen is our RTI feed system, where we have built these databases to quickly calculate statistics in all shapes or forms for a large number of hindcast data sets. And so yes, that can be done. And the second part of the question, can this be set up at a forecast agency? Yes, certainly the EVS system is something that is freely available from the National Weather Service. People can look at their forecast using that system.
So it could be both. We could provide services to do the evaluation, and there's also tools already within DelftFuse in particular. There's tools already integrated. If another organization is using a different system, we could do both. We could set up. We could do the service to generate hindcasts, or we could set up an organization to be able to perform the analysis themselves. Is that true?
Right. That is true. Yeah, and we and our partner Infosys, we are actually looking right now at maybe setting up a system where people could submit their forecast on a real-time basis to a system that then automatically would do all the computations and provide the performance back out to the user. That would be more like a subscription type approach. And
a little bit different paradigm possibly or setup, whether we're talking about real time, you have a system running in real time and we're updating performance metrics as forecasts are generated, as opposed to hindcasting, a little bit different structures maybe to how we go about doing that.
Right. Yeah. With the hindcasting, actually helping people in the decision-making process. Would you actually gain a lot of benefit from putting all the money into acquiring forecasts at a particular location, or building your own forecast system at a particular location? That we can try to answer that question before you make the decision and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to set up something that in the end might not actually be helpful to you. So that's where the hindcasting typically comes in, to do this evaluation before you make an investment. Of course, you can also use it once you have a system to find out, does it make sense to improve my forecast? Where can I potentially do that if I wanted to? Again, hindcasting is more like maybe for building overall confidence and to help investment decisions, versus the race day thing is during operations to just gain confidence. How well am I doing right now?
Get an understanding. often there's questions raised about what information did I have, what decisions did we, kind of going back and assessing, what decisions did we make, what were the forecasts telling us, kind of understanding what happened, right? And how beneficial the information was for that specific event. Looks like we are at the top of the hour. Are there any other lingering questions? I think we've gotten through all of them. We will be sharing the recording of this presentation, and we'll be sending a follow-up email. So please feel free to respond to that email with and send us any further questions. We're happy to have individual conversations if there's a lot of questions on any aspect of this. So please feel free to reach out. Any other points, Michael? Closing points, thoughts?
No, we're out of questions. We're out of time. We're not out of ideas. So thanks, everybody, for a nice hour with us. I hope we were able to provide you some value. And as I said, if you have additional questions, please let us know. We're happy to answer.
Yeah. Thank you all so much for your time.
Yeah. Thank you, and have a great day. Bye-bye.